Welcome to Novelist Spotlight, the podcast where published fiction writers are interviewed to gather their insights and writing lessons so we can use them to make ourselves better and more effective writers. Now, on with our program.
Hi, I'm Kayla Olson. I am an author who has written books for teens and young adults, but have now pivoted into writing for adult audiences with my latest rom-com, The Reunion.
And this is Mike Council, your host. Kayla, welcome to the program. And, you've got The Reunion, but you've also got a couple earlier novels that sound much more sci-fi to me. Correct?
Yes, very much. My first two books were for a young adult audience, and I always call them sci-fi survival books. One is set on a desert island and one is set on a space station.
So one of them is called the Sandcastle Empire. The other one is called The Splintered Silence.
Yeah.
And the Reunion is a rom-com. Is this a pivot that you have made in a path that you are going to stay on? Is that the case?
Yes. I have another book, another adult book, a rom-com coming out in 2024. So I pivoted pretty much in every way when the pandemic hit. My first two books were, thinking about how bad the future could get. And when the pandemic hit in 2020, I wanted to escape into a really fun world with a happy ending. So I pivoted to adult romance and then have stuck with it. And I don't have plans to pivot back anytime soon.
So why this particular genre? Because there's a lot of different paths you could have taken. You decided to go the rom-com route. Is it natural to you? Is it something that resonates with your being? Or is it that you made maybe a little bit more of a strategic and considered choice than that, just in terms of, hey, this is something that I think I can sell?
I think a little bit of both. So I had been already reading a lot of adult romance in the year or two leading up to 2020. I just found my tastes kind of gravitating more and more toward that. But my literary agents represent some of the most successful romance authors that are out there today. Emily Henry and Christina Lauren and Jasmine Guillory and Sally Thorne and so many others. And so I knew they'd also had a few clients, Emily Henry and V.E. Schwab among them, who had started in young adult books and then transitioned into adult. And so I knew that my agents would know what to do with it if I decided to write a book like that. They would be able to know exactly which editors and which publishers to send to. And so for all the reasons, all the things that I could have gone into, and after I wrote science fiction for young adults, I feel like this was natural both for me and my personality, as well as what my agents are interested in selling. So it felt like a win in both of those areas.
Well, I could hear an agent saying to you that, yeah, fine, that's a great category. It's a big category. People read a lot of that material. But what's going to distinguish you from the rest of the class? Assuming that you were asked that question, or maybe you asked yourself that question, what's the answer to that?
Yeah, so I think one of the things I love is just having a lot of heart and substance and depth to my plot. So it's not essentially only about the romance. I really like when characters have multiple dimension to them. And there are a lot of good romance authors who do this, but sometimes it's all about the romance, and that's like the main thing. But I thought it was important to also include career questions and questions of, my main character's going through a grief element after losing her father when she was young. And so just multiple things that might be a little weightier in this particular category. So some of that stems from writing heavier books before, and then transitioning into something lighthearted. I think there's still always going to be an aspect of depth to it.
Let's take The Reunion. Just a very high level readout on The Reunion is when two former teen stars reconnect at the reunion for their hit TV show, they discover their feelings for one another were not merely scripted in this charming and heartwarming novel. Now, at that level, it sounds like there's not a lot of depth to that, but that's just at that very high level. How do you deepen it from there?
Right. So in my first draft, I knew that my main character Liv, she was averse to like the public aspects of her career. So she loves the art of performing, but not necessarily all the lack of privacy that comes along with it. And so an example of how I did deepen this was I had to figure out, well, why does she feel this way? What is going on with her that makes it, when so many people in this career want the fame aspect in addition to the art of it, what makes her so opposed to her private life being out there for everybody to see? And it helped me develop her backstory about how her father was a very famous and well-respected actor and ultimately died in a car crash caused by the paparazzi. And so she has just a history that's deep seated in her to be a little more reserved. And that became like a personal issue for her. So I think that's a good example of how there's a lot of lightness on the surface, but then developing kind of a deeper backstory to support their motivations and their feelings.
Right, the psychological component to this whole thing. Now, let's rewind for a minute. Your earlier novels, young adult novels, sci-fi young adult novels, why did you go that route to start with? What were you accomplishing at the time with that? And what drew you to it as a starting point as a writer?
I absolutely loved the show Lost on TV. I was obsessed with that and loved all the theories that you could put into it. I was part of so many just groups that would make theories from week to week. And the cliffhangers were great, but
you were live tweeting at the time and all that.
I loved it. And I thought that the writers on that show did such a compelling job of using their ensemble cast with flashbacks and the present narrative. And then they made it as much about the characters as they did about the science and the intrigue. And it seemed just like a really fun challenge to me to try to come up with something twisty and fun and scary at some points and high stakes. It felt like I've always been a big fan of jigsaw puzzles, and this felt like a jigsaw puzzle where I was both doing it without a picture to look at and then also like creating all the pieces from scratch. So I could then put them together. So it was just a really complicated sort of project in the vein of the shows that I was interested in at the time and the books that I enjoyed reading. So
is there an equivalent show, a rom-com show that you could point to that is kind of companion to the reunion? Not that it's the same story. I'm just saying that Lost led you down the path to the sci-fi for young adult. Was there anything that came along that made you feel that, hey, that's a good channel for me, the rom-com channel, something that inspired it in the same way?
It was a very clear moment of inspiration when I was watching Boy Meets World, the old show from the 90s, and realized the main characters on this show, I think it was 7 seasons long, and they were teenagers the whole time, but they played boyfriend and girlfriend for almost the entire series until they even got married on the show. And I thought, that's really unusual to see a pair of teen actors staying in the same relationship for 7 years. And would that complicate and blur the lines between fiction and reality to where maybe they're very close off screen, but when they have to act out those parts for 7 years and even get married on the show, would that ever like introduce questions of, do I have feelings for this person? And so I decided to explore just a fictional version of that where the characters did have feelings for each other, but were so close that they never acted on them during the filming of the show. And it's only in their adult life that they come back to reconnect as older, more mature people who haven't seen each other in so long. So Boy Meets World was a huge inspiration, as well as Dawson's Creek. I was a big Dawson's Creek girl.
Yes. Yeah, that was a big hit show for sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's been really interesting on Instagram, now that the book has come out, just to see all the posts that I've been tagged in where people will say, oh, this reminded me so much of Gilmore Girls, or this reminded me of Felicity, or this reminded me of the OC, and just all these various teen shows. It's been great to see. It's kind of like insert the nostalgic show of your choice.
Now you feel okay with that. You don't, when somebody does that, you don't feel as though, well, I don't want my writing to be redolent of something else. I want it to be something completely an island unto itself. I don't know if that's even possible, but it sounds like you feel fine that people are making this connection and feel a sense of kinship there.
Yeah, to me, I feel like that means that I've accomplished exactly what I wanted to do, in just kind of awakening those nostalgic feelings. I wanted to evoke just like a familiar show that isn't specifically like, if everybody across the board said, oh, this is Dawson's Creek, then I would feel a little bit like I had poured too much of that one show into it. But since everybody sees a different show in it, I feel like I created something that is
malleable. Malleable. Is that a good adjective?
Yes, perfect. Yep.
Let me ask you about your bio. I like the way you start your bio. Once upon a time, I was the girl who made your latte at the Starbucks drive-thru, and your bank teller, and the girl who handed you your chicken biscuit at the local Chick-Fil-A. Very, breezy and all that. But I paused on Chick-Fil-A because Chick-Fil-A, it's a religious organization. It tends to recruit people from local churches. Is that so? I guess what I'm asking, I'm trying to intuit a little bit here. Were you recruited from a church? Are you a Christian? Is that why you worked at Chick-fil-A? Does that actually play a role in your writing, your faith, if there's any faith at all? I'm just intuiting a little bit.
I have never been asked this question, and I think it's so fascinating because everything you said is so true. But I am a Christian, but I didn't get recruited to work at Chick-fil-A because of that. It was just like the most convenient job at the time for what I was doing. And they were hiring people and it worked with my schedule. So that's what I took. But yeah, I am a Christian, and I think there will always be some element of hope and faith versus fear in anything that I write, I feel like. But I never wanted to go just like the Christian fiction route, because I think that you can... Too
limiting.
Yeah, so limiting. And, just look at, some of the biggest properties of all time, like Star Wars and Harry Potter and all these things. You can find themes throughout, that are applicable to, I don't know, those kind of themes of friendship and hope and grace and love and sacrifice are woven into pretty much every story, I feel like. So I never wanted to limit myself to telling something so on the nose, I guess.
Right. Now you're a Texan as well, is that right?
I am, yes.
You are a Texas native. You live in Texas now. Lone Star State, Lone Star beer, all that stuff. So as a Christian, are you a Baptist? I don't want to get too personal here. I don't know how comfortable you are with this sort of line of questioning, but I like to dig down a little bit and understand a little bit more about what molded a person and what their jumping off point might be.
Yeah, so I grew up Baptist. I have one half of my family is Lutheran and the other half is Baptist, and we grew up just in a Baptist church. And then when I moved to college, it was a non-denominational, just Bible church, not on the charismatic end, but just kind of no one major affiliation. and I actually sang on the worship team for probably 10 years. Music has always been a huge part of my life as well. So, yeah, that was a while back.
Yeah. Let me ask you about being in the window at Starbucks and Chick-Fil-A, and then here you are also a bank teller.
Yes.
And so here's all these different people you're seeing. At the time, did you see characters in those people? Did you see potential characters for your writing? Were you interested in writing at the time? Were you an aspiring novelist while these people were coming across and you saw people with, whether it be physical descriptions or voices or personalities, that you thought that could make a good character in a short story, or that could be that novel I've been cogitating over? That person sounds like a character that just walked into my life there, albeit in a very glancing way. Or were you not interested in writing yet? When did this all happen?
It all did happen around the same time. I worked at Chick-fil-A first, and then Bank of America, and then Starbucks. And by the time when I started at Chick-fil-A, I was very much an extrovert, and just loved all the interaction. By the time I got to Bank of America, I was a little more cynical because people would yell at you for everything, no matter your good intentions, including the management. And then by the time I got to Starbucks, it was just kind of baffling to see how people would go about their day so angrily sometimes too. And just, you're here to get coffee. It's a really fun place to be. So around then, I remember feeling like I had been a lifelong reader, but I hadn't really considered writing a book yet until I started feeling super just burnt out on the customer service side of things. And it started feeling so repetitive from hour to hour and then from day to day, like I wasn't just accomplishing anything meaningful. And so those little 30-second conversations all day long when I was in the window handing out drinks, I felt like, yeah, sure, you have the opportunity to make somebody's day really good or bad, but I tried to make it good. But I wanted to use the creative side of myself. And I remember thinking, I see these people for only 30 seconds of a whole day. And to me, they are very much just a side character in my life. But to their life, like they're the main character. And all I see is just the tip of the iceberg of their life, whether they are rude to me or kind to me. There's a bigger story going on there. And so I think that definitely was part of, getting my wheels turning, thinking, hey, I could write a story. And I kind of want to think about how, just trying to make all my side characters feel as real as possible, even if they only show up for a paragraph on the page or for a line on the page, realizing that they have main character energy on their own. I just need to make that feel real, even if they're not on the screen for very much, so.
In your bio, you do say, I always love to create.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, you said one day it occurred to me that writing a novel would require all of the things that have to do with, the puzzle. You mentioned you love puzzles, and you mentioned that in your bio. So the novel kind of swept all that up into a single effort, but kind of swept up a lot of your instincts there. And then you say, I sat down one day and got to work. Talk about how that all just came to be. What was there any event that really triggered it to the point where you said, this, I've made the decision and I'm going to do this, and led to the day that you sat down and just started writing and have not stopped?
Right. Yeah. I think that I had been thinking along those lines. I want to write a book for a little bit, but I just didn't have any idea on how to start or what I would write a story about. And one day I woke up with the word speck in my head, like a speck in your eye. And I was like, that sounds like a name for a character who maybe has been insignificant and had a hard time, Speck Hawkins. And this character was in my head. And I just was like, you know what? I think that's my idea. I'm going to sit down and start writing on it. And it was a middle grade, fantasy novel. So even more different than the stuff that I've ended up publishing. But I once I got that idea, I picked up a book at Barnes and Noble about NaNoWriMo, the National Novel Writing Month that everybody does in November, where they sit down and try to write 50,000 words of a book in November. And it was the first like writing book that I'd ever read, just to give any sort of idea of like how many words are required for a book, like how you actually sit down and do this. So I bought that book. I had nothing but like a name for a character, and then just kind of sat down and started writing. And it was definitely a learning curve. I think I spent 2 years working on that first book, just learning how to write more than a 10-page college paper, and how to hold so many words and stories and characters and plot threads in my head. And then after I got the first draft down, like learning how to revise it was a whole nother thing. So it was definitely a work of trial and error at first. And I got my hands on as many writing craft books as I could. And they're actually right here on the bookshelf right next to me right now.
Talk about NaNoWriMo, though. And NaNoWriMo, for anybody who doesn't know, it is National Novel Writing Month. Did I get that right, Kayla?
That's right.
And so you have to write, I mean, if you're going to participate and you're going to succeed at it, you're supposed to write how many words a day?
I think it's like 1,650 words a day that will add up to about 50,000.
So 50,000 would be a short novel, or at least a novella, but a short novel. So you really are under the gun to turn out that copy each day. Talk about that a little bit. Was that a revelation for you? Did you actually hit that number? Or I know a lot of people who do it that don't hit the number, but they still find it to be valuable. Did you find it valuable? Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what it did for you, or didn't do for you, if that was the case?
Right. Yeah. I don't think I actually wrote my first draft in November. I think I started around May, but I decided to just apply the same principles. And it took me about 3 months to write the first draft, which is about 80,000 words. So I think I more or less stayed on track, probably around 1,000 to maybe 1,700 words a day. And it was a great starting point to help me figure out like how to sit down and just give me something to shoot for. Cause on my own, I probably would have written like a couple pages. So reading that's what people went for, and that was even like, learning about how many words make up a novel and kind of what the goal should be. It was just all very new information at the time. I will say back then it was much easier to hit my word count goals than it is today. I'm on deadline right now for my new book. And back then I feel like I probably took 2 or 3 times as many words to say the same thing that I would say now.
But then you would take it and distill it down to
yes.
A more concentrated piece of writing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how many words a day are you trying to hit now? I mean, a good writing day, if you were to average it out, how many words a day are you trying to produce?
For me, something sustainable and realistic is around 1,500 words a day.
That's a lot.
That is a lot.
I mean, that adds you figure, you had mentioned that 3 months you had written 80,000 words in 3 months. That's being very productive. So
it's hard.
Go ahead. It's hard to what?
It's harder to do that because like if I look back at that book, yes, it was 80,000 words, but probably 40,000 words of it was actual story.
Yeah. So that I think that's a key point right there, is that it's one thing to produce a lot of copy, and the idea, I think certainly in part, is to get writing, to actually just get the copy on the page. You're going to throw a lot of it away. Because you're going to go through a distillation process. But the idea is not to hold back and dribble and drab, or just dribble copy onto the page or onto the screen when that doesn't really get you to the goal very quickly. And oftentimes it's opening the floodgates is when, you're going to produce a lot of mediocre stuff that you end up throwing away, but it also gives you the opportunity to get into a groove to
Yes.
where you start to, you've experienced that then, because I heard that, yeah, an emphatic yes.
Yeah,
Talk
yeah.
about that.
So much more. It's helpful to be able to have the momentum there. It's one thing that makes it hard now is that I'm so much of a perfectionist, and especially coming from a finished final draft on the reunion and then trying to draft a first draft all over again. If I had been able to get in a headspace where I was okay with just throwing stuff on the page, I really feel like I could have built a lot of momentum early on. But like for this particular book, it has been very tedious to try and like let go of my perfectionistic skills and just get the story on the page and remember like, yeah, you can revise this later, but just get the words down for now. So that's always like a tension for me while writing, just the urge to get it on the page, but also the simultaneous urge to just get it as good as possible right off the bat. And there's benefits to both, but I think if the more you can get on the page consistently day after day, the more momentum you'll build and be able to just eventually revise it sooner.
Revise it sooner, and also just come out with content that might never manifest otherwise, if you treat it as I have to, concentrate for several minutes before I'll put the next phrase on the page. That's painstaking, and it doesn't really allow. It's really indicative of somebody who's editing and writing simultaneously, which is not a good idea, because it's like driving a car and putting your foot on the accelerator and the brake at the same time. You're not going to get very far very fast.
It's
But
so
if you
true.
just leave the brake alone and say, I'll brake later, I'll edit later, then you've got an opportunity to let the subconscious mind
Yes.
go to work. So
Yeah.
you mentioned that you're on deadline and you're working on your next novel. What can you tell us about your new one? That when first of all, I know you're probably going to keep the title and some of the elements of it secret for now, but when do you expect it to hit the market, be completed, hit the market, and what can you tell us about it?
Yeah, we actually finally did just announce it a couple weeks ago. So I can't tell you the title. It's called The Lodge.
Ah,
It is set at a ski resort up in Vermont. Um, it is scheduled to come out in, technically it's winter of 2024, and I need to find out whether winter means January, February, or like December. Quite a difference, but it should be out sometime next year. Um,
what's
and
the dust cover, or the notes on the cover? The dust cover say about the lodge. Can you give us a summary?
yeah, so I'm not very practiced at talking about it yet because it was a secret for so long, and I've only done 2 events where I've been able to talk about it. So it's about a girl who is a ghostwriter. She's writing the biography of a famous boy band member, and his boy band was the most famous at the time. Kind of, I feel like this is going to be another insert your own nostalgic boy band of choice situation. For me, it was NSYNC. I think for some people, it'll feel like One Direction. Anyway, so they were a very popular boy band, and the guy she's writing the biography about, he and his co-lead singer, they were big rivals at the time. And so that rival of his went missing 8 years ago. And so there's an element of just rivalry and celebrity and fame in this one, just kind of like in my first one, but in a very different setting and a very different situation. When we announced it, some people thought it was a thriller because of the missing boy band member, but no, it is a romance. When she's on location in Vermont she's doing a writing retreat in Vermont, trying to fast draft this biography of the boy band member. She finds a lead about the missing the guy who went missing 8 years ago. So it all comes together, but I'm telling people, I'm like, it is not a thriller. It's very much a cozy romance set in Vermont, with like skiing and ice skating and twinkle lights and lots of snow and staying warm when it gets cold outside. So
is Vermont a place you've spent some time?
I have never been there.
Oh, okay. So it's a product of your imagination and probably some distant research. Do you ski?
I have been twice in New Mexico, and I got altitude sickness both times.
I shouldn't laugh, but it sounds like it could play a quite a comedic role in the book.
Yes, for sure. It was. I love watching it. I love the Olympics, watching skiing in the Olympics. And I have friends with a place up in Vermont and another friend in Tahoe who skis every day. And so
I have resources.
Yeah. But I myself have not been. I would love to try a writing retreat up there and hopefully not get sick.
Now, you probably had romances in your life. I mean, Taylor Swift, for a while, people were saying it seemed that she would just date men and then break up with them. So it became material for her songwriting. And I don't know how much of your own personal romantic encounters in your life have become material for your books. I actually don't know if you're married or not. Are you married or
married? So
you are. Or you? I'm sorry, I missed that. Oh,
yes,
you are. Okay.
We're coming up on 16 years this summer, so it's been a little had like the dating scene, but yeah, definitely. I'm also
you're a little removed from it, just in terms of writing about people who are involved in romance.
Yes,
but you are able to still receive this stuff via osmosis, I would imagine, whether it be friends, family members, or also just movies and TV programming and all that. Do you find sure. Is that where you derive your material these days, or do you have a very long memory and had a very rich dating life before marriage?
I think it's a little bit of both. It wasn't a super rich dating life, I would say. I had a few long-term relationships and then lots of crushes, and I remember feeling like a lot of the crush material will work its way into the book, whether that's a friend, crush on a best friend, or someone else who's equally just difficult to get to know, like a private person, like just I have a strong memory for what it was like to be in those situations. So
sure.
that helped a lot when writing young adults as well. I think some things just from your formative years never go away, but then also just reading and consuming other media with those kind of things keeps it fresh.
Yeah. So was there a turning point in your writing life, a time when something special happened that set you on the right course, or was an epiphany? Or where you knew, hey, I'm gonna make it at this. I'm good at it. Because we all go into it not really knowing whether or not we're going to succeed at it. But what about that? Was there a turning point, or maybe a couple turning points in your writing life that you can identify?
There were, and the first turning point was not of the positive sort. It was, so I had started that book, my middle grade fantasy. I worked on it for like 2 years, but then I got pregnant and was so sick for like my entire pregnancy. And then once he was born, he never slept and I never slept and I was exhausted. And so it went about 18 months where I didn't get to write at all. And I decided, I put so much effort into this before I had a baby, and I really do still want to do it. So I started getting up at the crack of dawn and working for 2 hours every day before my baby would wake up. And, he didn't have any nap time. Like I would put him down, but he would only sleep for like 27 minutes. So I'd set my timer for 27 minutes. And so for a year, I was working on this project, just devoting so much energy and determination into it. And it ended up being the book that I signed with my literary agents on. But then when they tried to sell it to editors, it just got a lot of, we almost love it enough. And maybe like, we like some aspects, please send us whatever Kayla writes next. And at that point, I had heard a friend of mine on a podcast saying that she wants to measure her own success by not by how many books have her name on the spine, but by how many books have her name in the acknowledgement section, for being a supportive and wonderful like part of the community and a friend to other authors. And it really kind of made me think, as we talked about before, I am a Christian, and I feel like so many people say, like, if you just work at something for long enough and hard enough, it's going to happen. And I just hit this point where I was like, I don't feel like that's necessarily true. Like, if it's meant to happen, it will happen. And if it's not meant to happen, there is nothing I can do to change that. And so I had to kind of make my peace with saying, I'm spending a lot of time on this. I don't feel like there's ever any guarantee of success with it. I don't feel like I'm necessarily going to have a published book if I just stick with it. That doesn't happen for everybody. So am I okay with being in this business and working hard at it if I never end up with anything to show for it other than my name in people's acknowledgement sections for being, is that my role in this community, just to be a supportive friend and never somebody who has an actual book? And so that was a real turning point for me, because I did I almost walked away from doing it at all. But I decided it was worth it to me, that I loved doing it just for the sake of doing it, not necessarily because I wanted people to love me for it. And
so the answer to that question was yes, then. Am I okay if I don't get anything published, but I'm a friend to people who and make contributions to their efforts?
Mm-hmm.
How did you do that in terms of where were you connecting with people and being a positive or supportive force in their writing lives or in their lives in general? Were you attending a lot of book fairs and such?
Yeah, I had a lot of friends online that I'd connected with who were writing books at the same time, and we would trade work. And I had some other friends in person who lived in Austin, where I lived at the time, and we would meet up and encourage each other, and we were all on various paths along the way. So for me personally, that looked like being genuinely happy for my friends when they signed with an agent before I did, or they got a book deal before I did, giving my time to read their work, and giving my thoughts. I had also worked as an assistant for a literary agent at one point, like reading and critiquing manuscripts. And so I felt like I had a lot of good insight to offer whenever somebody gave me their manuscript for feedback. And so I spent a lot of hours just giving feedback on friends' work, and just generally trying to be a kind and supportive person that realized, if you're going to get a yes, it doesn't always happen at the same time as anybody else on the same road. And that, sometimes things happen very quickly for people, but then they get hard later. And then for me, I felt like it was hard up front. And then my yes finally came with that project that I was determined to keep working on. Like, that book that I decided to keep writing was The Sandcastle Empire. And less than a year later, it's sold, and a lot of great things happened. So I was really glad that I stuck with it.
Yeah. And I understand what you were saying, that there are times when people stick with something that probably they should abandon. Not everything works out. If it's meant to happen, it'll happen. But sometimes sticking with something is actually the wrong course of action when you can start a new project, something that's going to work better for you. So you hit the target. And here you are at work on novel number 4.
Yes.
And actually completing it, just putting the finishing touches on it, it sounds like. What is the hardest part of the writing practice for you? What's the most difficult part? What's your biggest source of frustration, perhaps, when you're
Hmm.
working on a book? Is there something that in particular that you find to be especially difficult?
Yeah, I think just my perfectionism gets in the way a lot of times, like we were talking about, of me just letting go. Like whether most of my projects I've had to finish writing and revising before we sold them. And this one is the first one that I sold before writing, which is great, but it's, whether you're writing and you don't know if it's ever going to become anything, or you're writing because it's going to become something, like it's hard either way.
So you
Um,
sold it on based on the concept. It
yeah,
was you,
yeah,
you said what the book was about, and they said we want it.
yes. So
Wow, that's a great thing.
yeah, it's wonderful. But it's definitely different, to know that, oh, I'm not writing a first draft on my own timeline anymore. I'm not gonna get to put it through like 3 or 4 revisions before my editor sees it. So and that's only further contributing to my perfectionistic tendencies, to try to want to be impressive right out of the gate rather than just having something to turn in. But
Is it more pressure this way because they said yes, and it's like, oh, now I gotta turn out 80,000 words and deliver on. I mean, because there's one thing to have the concept, it's another thing to execute. Execution is really everything. Give two people the same concept, ask them to write, and somebody executes it well, somebody executes it poorly. Obviously, they know you can execute, but still, it would seem that there would be some maybe a higher degree of pressure.
yeah. Fortunately, what I lack in speed, I'm happy with the quality of what I've written so far, like the content itself of how the story's going. And I think they will also be happy with it. But my editor is fantastic and she's so kind, and her insight is just always worth the wait. And she's the kind of editor that makes you excited to revise. you know, Sometimes it can be intimidating because you're like, oh, I already made this. This is exactly how I want it to be. And don't anybody tell me how to change it. Well, it's not that way with my editor. She's fantastic. And every time I give her a draft, I just know that she's going to come back with something like very insightful that will really motivate me to revise it. So I'm not as afraid of turning it in as I could be because I have a very understanding and thoughtful publishing team that makes me feel at ease about that. I think it's just the sheer quantity of words that feels pressuring at the moment, just because I am not as fast as some people at getting them down. But the story itself, I'm feeling good about at least.
Interesting. So, talk about what writing does for you from a mental, emotional standpoint. What are the rewards of writing?
Yeah, it's so much fun and so strange just to see characters that you created in your head just become eventually just on the page these fully realized people. I think that I had my first, like one of my first full circle moments with this book, the reunion, at a book club meeting I went to last month. It was my local indie bookstore. They invited me, and there were probably about 20 people there, and they had all read the book, because normally when you do an author event, they're probably buying it for the first time rather than coming there to discuss it. And so it was my first time being in a room surrounded by people who had already read the book, and then we're talking about these characters as if they were real. And it's like, what a strange
Well, they
perspective.
are real. I mean,
Yeah.
unless a person has written, I've said this to authors before, and unless a person has actually written, they don't understand that these
Yeah.
characters are real. I mean, they take on a reality
Yeah.
because they exist within the mind. And but everything that exists outside of us exists within our minds too. It really is not that far a departure. I know I might be sounding a little
No,
psychotic right now, but I'm really not. I
no,
mean,
you're
these
saying
characters are very real.
they do feel real. And it's hard to explain, like, how when I write them, I do feel like I'm just like uncovering like a marble statue that's inside of a hunk of marble, like chiseling away until I discover what's already there. It's hard to explain how they just come to me like as if they're people that I know. And I'm about them as I write them, when in fact I'm creating them. But it's just a very strange thing. So I just love seeing, I think it's really fun for me to see worlds and characters come to life in a way that starts just as the tiniest idea seed in my head, and then finds its way onto the page, and many drafts later finds itself on a bookstore shelf, and then people can read it and talk about it, and you're like, whoa, this all came from one little idea.
Yeah. So talk about your writing regimen. Do you have any kind of writing ritual? Is there anything you do to prepare yourself before you actually sit down and just start clicking on the keys or writing on the legal pad?
Yeah, I usually have a cup of coffee with me. It usually gets cold at some point. And
you're a coffee fanatic, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons you worked at Starbucks. You're a black coffee drinker. Is that right?
That's how I got hired at Starbucks. I was a regular customer, and I was just hanging out in the cafe one day while the manager was interviewing somebody else. And that person left, and the manager turned to me and she was like, Kayla, you're in here all the time. Do you want to work here? You would get free coffee. Like, I can't work nights or weekends or holidays. And she's like, you're hired. And that's how I got the job. I wasn't even looking for a job at the time. And so, yes, I do love coffee. I've transitioned from mocha frappuccinos to lattes, now to black coffee. And
yeah, that's the purest form. I drink it black too. As I tell people, it's the purest form of coffee drinking. And if you adulterate it, there's something wrong with the coffee to begin with. So
that's right. Every time I get it from my favorite local coffee shop, they're like, would you like cream in your coffee? I was like, no, it's too good without it. Why would I mess it up? But yeah, so I'll get a cup of coffee, and then I'll sit at my desk. Right now, my office is full of stuff, including my giant neon sign. And a lot
that
of
says
stuff.
The Reunion.
Yes.
Yes.
A lot of stuff left over from the tour. And so I haven't been writing in my office because I haven't had the time to clean my office because I've had so much going on. So I actually ordered this like 4x4 pop-up tent. It looks like a carnival tent, and put it in my living room. And I have my desk inside there right now. And whenever I go in there, my son knows mommy's focusing. And it's helpful because my husband works from home, I work from home, and we homeschool our son. And so we've been tag teaming on the homeschool front, but especially while I'm on deadline, my husband's taking.
That's a lot.
It is a lot.
I mean, to homeschool your son.
Yeah.
Is homeschooling, to talk a little, if this isn't getting too personal, I'm just curious, are you homeschooling because you don't like what they teach at the public school there? Are there certain things you're trying to emphasize in his education that you don't think would get emphasized at the public school? Why the decision?
So he's always been exceptionally quick. When he was 3, he was multiplying and doing algebra and reading like crazy. And so there's always been a bit of asynchronicity with his age and his learning ability. We had him in public school for a while before everything shut down in 2020. But even in 3rd grade or so, he was basically doing like some subjects with his own peers, and then other subjects with the next grade level up. And he had 5 different teachers in elementary school. And when everything shut down, the communication was terrible. 6 weeks later, I got an email from his math teacher saying, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I forgot about him. And we had already communicated. Yes, it was awful. We had already communicated with his main teacher. We said, we have a math textbook here at home. We'll just work on that to kind of cut down on the communication. So we hadn't even questioned why we hadn't heard from his math teacher. But then to get an email like that 6 weeks later made us think, wow, this is not going to work if they're virtual the entire next school year, because he's very, very bright in math and reading. Needs a little more work on writing, but like he's also a computer programmer. He creates all this code from scratch, just like he has
Wow.
websites.
You got a prodigy on your hands, huh? There's no telling where your son's going to go.
Yeah. And so homeschooling has allowed a lot more flexibility with the curriculum itself, just to kind of take a little more time on the things where he needs more work, and then to be able to accelerate. And, he's already finished pre-algebra this year. He's a third of the way through like an algebra course book in 6th grade, and so it's been very, it's good, but it's different, so we know we would love to get him back in a public school at some point, or a private school, just when middle school hits. But for now, we just kind of stuck with it, because when everything shut down, it gave us a good chance to try out homeschooling and just do things at our own pace. And we all flourished with it. Like, it was kind of okay, here's a menu of school items we need to do today. We'll talk about it in between the breaks, but let's have mutual focus time. So he would work while I worked.
And I understand there's a lot of online resources for people who want to do homeschooling with their children. And I didn't even think about the fact that your story is probably similar to many other people, that when the pandemic happened and the schools got shut down and they had to do their own some homeschooling. They probably, I'm sure there's many people out there who decided, I'm just going to continue doing this because I can, there's probably a lot of benefits to it. Not only does your son not get held up by kids who don't learn as quickly, but also you get a lot more bonding time with your child.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. It's just been really great for our whole family. All three of us have really enjoyed the system. And, we're all productive, but we all have fun on our breaks, and it's been a really good situation. So, but on deadline, it makes it a little harder sometimes, just because my husband has to pick up a little more than he would otherwise. But sometimes he has a stretch of intense stuff at work where I have to pick it up too. So it'll all even out.
Yeah, you balance it out. So how about some writing advice for the listeners who want to get to where you're at, where they can just give a book concept and have their publisher say, we want it, go ahead and do it. That's a great place to be, Kayla. Just give a piece of writing advice that you would give to anybody, getting back to those acknowledgments that you are a part of with some of your contacts out there. What would you tell the aspiring novelist who's looking to get to your place in terms of how to succeed?
Yeah, thank you. The two things that I always come back to are, I always say, write because you love it and not because you want someone to love you for it. Because it's pretty much, there's no guarantee anybody's going to love you. You just kind of have to enjoy the process if you're going to spend that much time doing it, which kind of leads into the second piece of advice I always give, which is just focus on what you can control. All you can control are the words on the page and the story on the page. You can't control whether an agent will say yes to it. You can't control whether an editor will say yes, or whether readers or reviewers or anyone will say yes and pick it up, or if they'll like it. And so really all you can do is write a book that you love and that you're proud of, and hope that it falls into the perfect hands at the right time. So much to do with like taste and timing. I remember when I was querying, I sent out a letter to my literary agents, all the literary agents, trying to get an agent. And I got a form rejection and a full request within 5 minutes of each other on these same exact sample pages. And it was the best lesson that I ever could learn, which was just everybody has their own taste, and sometimes the timing's not right. That there's not necessarily anything wrong with my pages, but when someone connects with them, and if someone connects with them, is sometimes not all about you. So So just write a book that you love. It's never going to be perfect. Even the best books have negative reviews. And if you're proud of it and happy with it, then hopefully the timing will work out to where it'll connect with
Somebody
the
salutes. Yeah.
Yep.
Somebody says, we want the work. Now, that first part of your advice, which is write because you love to write, not because you want people to love you for it, because
Sure.
it may not come to that. So you were at that crossroad. You were describing that earlier where you were thinking, am I going to be okay if I do this, but I never get anything published? And you decided that there's another role to play, which had to do with being somebody who was acknowledged by other writers for being supportive and helpful and so on. But you must have made the decision that you do love the writing, that
Yeah.
and that was before you had been published. So is that was a crossroads that you came to, and the answer was, I love the
Yeah.
writing,
I
correct?
do love words on the page and just putting them together and stories, and it's a creative outlet and a puzzle all at once. And I think it would be hard to stop.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it gets in the blood, and it's it's one of those things where you just don't feel like yourself unless you're
Mhm.
writing. That's certainly the way I feel, and that's the way a lot of people feel. So, um, well understood. So, Kayla Olson has been my guest. The Reunion is her rom-com novel, and she's got another one coming out under the title. What is that title again, Kayla?
Called The Lodge, and
The
I have
Lodge.
my Instagram and my website if they want to read more about it. But
So you're okay. You're on Instagram. You're on
yes,
Facebook, Twitter, maybe
yeah,
TikTok. Before
yeah, a little of all of those. I'm mostly on Instagram as author,
Instagram. Okay.
um, but
What
I
is your handle again? I'm sorry.
it's author Kayla Olson.
There we go. There we
Yeah.
go. Well, thank you for taking the time, Kayla, especially on deadline. There's a lot of authors who say, well, I'm on deadline, so I can't come on the program. You'll want to contact me in 3 months. But you you obviously have the ability to multitask. And I really do appreciate you taking the time to come on the program and share your experiences with us.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a super fun and enjoyable conversation.